The dust-streaked horizon blurred with heat as Willow Larson struggled to take another step, her parched lips cracked and bleeding in the merciless Arizona sun of 1878. The men who'd abandoned her had taken everything: her water canteen, her horse, even her boots, leaving behind only a cruel promise that the desert would erase all evidence of their crime. Willow's legs finally buckled beneath her, sending her crashing to the scorching sand. Her honey-blonde hair, once immaculately pinned, now hung in limp strands around her dirt-streaked face. 3 days ago, she had been a respectable schoolteacher traveling west to start a new life in Tucson. Now she was certain she would die here, another nameless victim claimed by the unforgiving desert. As consciousness began to slip away, the distant drumming of hoofbeats penetrated her delirium. Surely another hallucination, she thought, like the lake she'd seen shimmering in the distance hours earlier. Willow's eyelids grew impossibly heavy as a shadow fell across her face. "Not today," came a gruff voice above her. Strong arms slid beneath her body, lifting her from the ground. "Not today, miss." It was the last thing she heard before darkness claimed her completely. When Willow opened her eyes again, the relentless sun had been replaced by a canvas of stars. She lay beneath a rough wool blanket near a crackling campfire, her head cushioned on what appeared to be a saddle. The cool night air felt heavenly against her skin. "You're awake." The deep voice came from across the fire. A man sat there, his features cast in shadow and firelight. "Thought I might have found you too late." Willow tried to speak, but her throat felt like sandpaper. The man immediately moved to her side, gently lifting her head and bringing a canteen to her lips. "Small sips," he instructed. "Too much at once will make you sick." The water was warm but felt like salvation sliding down her throat. After a moment, he pulled the canteen away despite her weak protests. "More in a bit," he promised. "Name's Fletcher Elliott. Most folks call me Fletch." "Willow," she managed to rasp. "Willow Larson." Fletcher nodded once, his expression somber beneath the brim of a weather-beaten hat. Now that he was closer, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a cloudless sky. A few days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw. "What happened to you, Miss Larson?" he asked, returning to his place across the fire. "Desert's no place for a lady to be wandering alone." Willow closed her eyes, the memory of her ordeal washing over her like a wave. "I wasn't alone, not at first." Her voice was barely audible. "I was traveling to Tucson for a teaching position. The stagecoach broke an axle yesterday. No, 3 days ago. The driver said we were only a half-day's ride from the next station. 2 men offered to escort me." Fletcher's expression darkened. "Johnson Brothers," Willow blinked in surprise. "Yes, how did you—" "They've done this before," he said grimly. "Rob stagecoach passengers, offer to help anyone who looks like they might be carrying valuables." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Never left anyone to die before, though. That's new." "They took everything," Willow whispered. "My trunk, my money, even my boots." She glanced down at her feet, now wrapped in clean bandages. "They said no one would ever find me out here. They were wrong." Fletcher handed her the canteen again. "Another sip, then try to sleep. We'll talk more in the morning." Willow wanted to ask more questions where they were, where he was taking her, but exhaustion pulled her back into darkness almost immediately. When morning came, Willow woke to the scent of coffee and bacon. She pushed herself into a sitting position, surprised to find her strength somewhat returned. Fletcher stood nearby, tending to a magnificent chestnut stallion. "Morning," he said, noticing her movement. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she admitted, though every muscle in her body protested. "Alive, thanks to you." He nodded, bringing her a tin cup of coffee and a plate with bacon and beans. "Eat slow. Your stomach needs to remember how." Willow took the food gratefully. As she ate, she studied her rescuer in the clear light of day. Fletcher Elliott was tall and lean, with broad shoulders that tapered to a narrow waist. His clothes were dusty, but well-maintained: a chambray shirt, worn denim trousers, and scuffed boots. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the holster housing a Colt revolver that looked as much a part of him as his own hand. "Are you a lawman?" she asked. Fletcher's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "No, madam, just a rancher." He gestured vaguely toward the north. "Got a spread about 20 miles from here. Was tracking a mountain lion that's been after my calves when I found your trail." Willow frowned. "My trail wasn't hard to follow. You were walking in circles." He sipped his own coffee. "Lucky I came along when I did." Lucky didn't begin to describe it. Willow knew she would have been dead by nightfall if Fletcher hadn't found her. "Where will you take me?" she asked. "I've lost everything. I have no money to pay for passage to Tucson, and my position there was contingent on my arrival by the 15th. She realized with a sinking heart that the date had likely already passed. Fletcher considered her for a moment. "There's a town called Copper Springs about a day's ride from here. Not much to look at, but they've got a sheriff who might help track down the Johnson boys. And a doctor who should take a look at those feet of yours." Willow nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Elliott. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "Fletch," he corrected her. "And no repayment necessary, Miss Larson. Couldn't very well leave you out there." After they'd eaten and packed up camp, Fletcher lifted Willow onto his horse before swinging up behind her. She stiffened at the impropriety of their positions, but there was nothing to be done about it. She could hardly walk, and they had only the one horse. "Relax," Fletcher said, his voice rumbling against her back. "It's a long ride to town." Willow tried to maintain a proper distance between them, but as the day wore on and the heat intensified, she found herself leaning back against his solid chest. His arms remained steady around her as he held the reins, careful never to hold her too tightly or inappropriately. They rode in companionable silence for most of the morning, stopping occasionally to rest the horse and drink water. Fletcher seemed content with the quiet, but Willow found herself curious about the man who had saved her life. "Have you always been a rancher?" she asked during one such rest. Fletcher was checking the horse's shoes, but he glanced up at her question. "No." "Rode with the cavalry for a while after the war, then did some scouting for the army." He straightened up. "Bought the ranch 3 years ago when I decided it was time to put down roots." "Do you have family there?" The question slipped out before she could consider its propriety. A shadow crossed his face. "No family, just me and a few hands to help with the cattle." He helped her back onto the horse before she could ask anything else, effectively ending the conversation. As they continued their journey, Willow noticed how the landscape gradually changed, becoming less barren as they traveled north. Small clusters of vegetation appeared, then scattered juniper trees, hinting at more water beneath the surface. Fletcher pointed out landmarks and signs of wildlife, teaching her to read the desert in a way she'd never considered before. "There's beauty here if you know how to look," he said, when she marveled at a cluster of tiny wildflowers growing improbably from a crack in a boulder. "Desert's harsh, but it's honest, makes no promises it can't keep," Willow pondered his words. "Unlike people," she said softly, thinking of the Johnson brothers and their false promises of help. Fletcher's arms tightened slightly around her. "Some people maybe, not all." They made camp that evening in a small canyon that offered protection from the wind. Fletcher built a fire and prepared a simple meal, moving with the efficiency of a man accustomed to fending for himself. Willow wished she could help, but her feet were still too painful for her to stand for long. "We should reach Copper Springs by midday tomorrow," Fletcher said as they ate. "Sheriff Donovan's a good man, he'll help you sort things out." Willow set down her plate, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. "And then what?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I have no money, no possessions. The school in Tucson will have hired someone else by now." Fletcher studied her across the fire, his expression unreadable. "Copper Springs has a school," he said after a moment. "No teacher, though. Last one left 6 months ago. Married a miner and moved to California." Hope flickered in Willow's chest. "Do you think they might hire me? Town council's been looking. They've got about 20 children who have been running wild since Miss Perkins left." He shrugged. "Wouldn't hurt to ask." For the first time since her ordeal began, Willow felt a sense of possibility. If she could secure a teaching position, she could begin to rebuild her life. Find lodging, earn money, perhaps even replace some of the treasured books she'd lost. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "Not just for the information, but for everything. I would have died out there if not for you." Fletcher looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Willow said firmly, "not anyone, not the Johnsons. Not the other travelers who must have passed nearby without seeing me." She met his gaze steadily. "You saved my life, Fletcher Elliott. I won't forget that." He held her gaze for a long moment before looking away, busying himself with his coffee cup. "Should get some sleep," he said gruffly. "Still got a ways to go tomorrow." Willow nodded, sensing his discomfort with her praise. As she settled beneath the blanket he'd provided, she watched him move around the camp, checking on his horse and securing their supplies for the night. There was something comforting in his methodical movements, in the quiet competence he exuded. When he finally lay down on the other side of the fire, tipping his hat over his eyes, Willow closed her own eyes and fell into the most peaceful sleep she'd had in days, feeling safe for the first time since her journey west had begun. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Willow woke to find Fletcher already up, cooking breakfast and saddling the horse. Her feet felt marginally better, and she managed to stand long enough to wash her face and hands in the small basin of water he'd provided. "You're looking more yourself," Fletcher commented as he handed her a plate of food. Willow touched her tangled hair self-consciously. "I must look a fright." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Wasn't talking about your appearance, Miss Larson." She looked at him questioningly. "There's life back in your eyes," he explained. "Yesterday they were dull, like you weren't fully back from wherever the desert took you." Willow hadn't realized he'd been studying her so closely. "I suppose near-death experiences can leave their mark." Fletcher nodded solemnly. "That they can." After breakfast, they resumed their journey. The terrain became increasingly verdant as they traveled, with more trees and even small streams cutting through the landscape. By mid-morning, Willow could see smoke from chimneys in the distance. "Copper Springs," Fletcher confirmed when she asked. "Named for the mine that founded it. Not much copper left these days, but the town survived." As they rode into Copper Springs, Willow tried to take in every detail. It was smaller than she'd expected, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, a few side streets with modest homes, and a white church steeple rising above the rooftops. People stopped to stare as Fletcher rode through town with Willow seated before him. He guided the horse directly to a building marked Sheriff's Office and dismounted before carefully helping Willow down. Her legs nearly buckled when her bandaged feet touched the ground, but Fletcher's strong hands steadied her. "Easy," he murmured. "Let me do the talking at first." The sheriff, a gray-haired man named Donovan, listened gravely to Fletcher's account of finding Willow in the desert and her story of being robbed and abandoned by the Johnson brothers. "Damn those boys," Donovan growled when Fletcher finished. "Been causing trouble for years, but this is a new low even for them." He turned kind eyes to Willow. "I'm sorry for what happened to you, Miss Larson. I'll send telegrams to the neighboring towns, see if we can't track them down." "Thank you, Sheriff," Willow said. "Meanwhile," Donovan continued, "we need to get you settled. Doc Parker should take a look at those feet, and Mrs. Hanson runs a boarding house where you can stay until you're back on your feet." Fletcher cleared his throat. Miss Larson was heading to Tucson to take a teaching position. "Thought she might be interested in filling the vacancy at our school." Donovan's bushy eyebrows shot up. "That'd be a blessing if it could be arranged. Children are running wilder than jackrabbits without proper schooling." He studied Willow more carefully. "You got credentials, Miss Larson?" "I do or did. They were in my trunk, along with everything else the Johnsons stole." Willow straightened her shoulders. "But I graduated from the Boston Female Normal School and taught for 3 years in Pennsylvania before coming west." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "I'll arrange for you to meet with the town council tomorrow. They're desperate enough they might hire you on the spot." After leaving the sheriff's office, Fletcher escorted Willow to the doctor's small clinic. Doctor Parker, a kindly man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, examined her feet and pronounced them bruised but healing well. "Mr. Elliott did a fine job with these bandages," he remarked. "Not your first time tending injuries, I take it," Fletcher shrugged. "Picked up a few things in the cavalry," the doctor nodded knowingly. "Well, Miss Larson, you're lucky he found you when he did. Another day in that desert without water and we wouldn't be having this conversation." "I know," Willow said softly, glancing at Fletcher. He stood by the door, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable with the praise. After the doctor had applied fresh bandages and given her a pair of soft moccasins to wear until her feet healed completely, Fletcher walked Willow to the boarding house. Mrs. Hanson, a plump, motherly woman, took one look at Willow's bedraggled appearance and immediately whisked her inside, clucking sympathetically. "You poor dear. Just look at the state of you. We'll have you in a hot bath and clean clothes before you can blink." Willow turned to thank Fletcher, but Mrs. Hanson was already pulling her toward the staircase. She glanced back to see him standing in the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Mr. Elliott," she called, "thank you for everything." He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. "Miss Larson, I'll check on you tomorrow." True to Mrs. Hanson's word, Willow was soon soaking in a copper tub filled with blissfully hot water. The landlady had provided a borrowed nightgown and wrapper, promising to help Willow find more suitable clothing the next day. "Town will take care of you until you're settled," Mrs. Hanson assured her. "That's how we do things in Copper Springs, and bringing a teacher. Why, they'll treat you like royalty." After her bath, Willow ate a hearty meal in the boarding house dining room and retired early to her small but comfortable room. As she drifted toward sleep, her thoughts turned to Fletcher Elliott. There was something about him, a quiet strength, a fundamental decency that had touched her deeply. He had saved her life and asked for nothing in return, not even recognition for his actions. She wondered if she would see him again after tomorrow, or if he would simply return to his ranch, considering his duty to her fulfilled. The thought left her with an unexpected sense of emptiness. The next morning, Mrs. Hanson arrived with an armful of clothing. "From the ladies of the town," she explained. "Word travels fast around here. Everyone's pitching in to help get you back on your feet." Overwhelmed by the generosity of strangers, Willow dressed in a simple blue cotton dress that fit her reasonably well. Mrs. Hanson helped her arrange her hair, and by the time they were finished, Willow felt almost like herself again. She had just come downstairs when there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Hanson opened it to reveal Fletcher, hatless and freshly shaven, wearing a clean shirt and vest. Willow's heart gave an unexpected leap at the sight of him. "Mr. Elliott," Mrs. Hanson greeted him cheerfully. "Come to escort our new teacher to the town council meeting, have you, if Miss Larson doesn't object," he said, his eyes finding Willow's. "I would appreciate the company," Willow replied, surprised by the formality in her own voice. Fletcher offered his arm, and Willow took it, hyper-aware of his solid presence beside her as they walked toward the town hall. He seemed different in town, more reserved, more conscious of appearances than he had been in the desert. "You clean up nicely, Miss Larson," he said as they walked. Willow smiled. "As do you, Mr. Elliott. I hardly recognized you without the dust." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Don't get used to it. Ranch work isn't kind to clean shirts." The town council meeting went even better than Willow had dared to hope. The 5 council members, the mayor, the bank manager, the general store owner, Dr. Parker, and a local rancher listened to her describe her qualifications and teaching philosophy, then conferred briefly before offering her the position on the spot. "School's been closed since January," Mayor Hollister explained. "Building needs some work and you'll need supplies, but we can have it ready by Monday next if that suits you." "That would be perfect," Willow agreed, almost dizzy with relief. "I can't thank you enough for this opportunity." "It's us who should be thanking you," the bank manager said earnestly. And Mr. Elliott for bringing you to us." Fletcher, who had been sitting quietly at the back of the room during the interview, merely nodded in acknowledgement. After the meeting, several townspeople approached to welcome Willow and introduce themselves. Mothers promised to bring their children to school on Monday, and the general store owner offered to order any books or supplies she might need. Willow felt surrounded by kindness after her harrowing ordeal in the desert. Through it all, Fletcher remained nearby, not participating in the conversations but maintaining a watchful presence. When the crowd finally dispersed, he approached her. "Seems you found your place," he said. "Thanks to you," Willow replied. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Fletcher shook his head. "No debt between us, Miss Larson." An awkward silence fell. Willow realized with a pang that this might be goodbye. Fletcher had his ranch to return to, and she had a new life to build in Copper Springs. "Will I see you again?" she asked impulsively, then blushed at her forwardness. Something flickered in his eyes. "I come to town for supplies every couple of weeks, and church on Sundays when I can manage it." Willow nodded, unreasonably pleased by this information. "Then perhaps our paths will cross again." "I expect they might," he cleared his throat. "I should head back to the ranch, got work waiting." "Of course," Willow extended her hand. "Thank you again, Mr. Elliott, for my life." Fletcher took her hand, and for a moment Willow thought he might lift it to his lips. Instead, he gave it a gentle squeeze before releasing it. "Take care of yourself, Miss Larson." With that, he touched his hat brim, turned, and walked away toward the livery where his horse was stabled. Willow watched him go, feeling as though something important was walking away with him. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity as Willow settled into life in Copper Springs. The townspeople had rallied around her, providing clothing, books, and everything she needed to start afresh. The school building, a modest wooden structure at the edge of town, had been cleaned and repaired, with new slate boards installed and desks arranged in neat rows. By Monday morning, Willow stood nervously at the schoolhouse door, watching as children of various ages made their way toward her. Some came eagerly, others were clearly being dragged by determined parents. All regarded her with curiosity. "Good morning," she greeted each child as they entered. "I'm Miss Larson." By the end of that first day, Willow was exhausted but exhilarated. She had 23 pupils ranging in age from 6 to 16, with widely varying levels of education. Some could barely write their names. Others showed surprising aptitude for mathematics or literature. All seemed hungry for knowledge after months without formal schooling. The days fell into a pleasant rhythm. Willow taught during the week, attended church on Sundays, and gradually became part of the community. She made friends with several of the townswomen, particularly Sarah Matthews, the young wife of the general store owner who had a passion for books equal to Willow's own. "You've brought life back to this town," Sarah told her one afternoon as they shared tea in the store's back room. "The children talk about nothing but school now." Willow smiled, pleased by the compliment. "They're wonderful children, eager to learn, most of them. And the mothers are grateful to have them out of the house for a few hours each day." Sarah laughed. She gave Willow a sidelong glance. "Speaking of gratitude, Fletcher Elliott was asking after you yesterday when he came in for supplies." Willow's heart quickened. "Was he? I haven't seen him since my first day in town." "He keeps to himself mostly," Sarah said. "Has ever since he bought the rocking E 3 years ago. Polite but private, that's Fletcher." She stirred her tea thoughtfully. "He seemed different yesterday, though, almost sociable." Willow tried to appear merely curious. "Different how?" "Stayed to chat for one thing. Usually, he's in and out with his supplies as quick as can be." Sarah smiled mischievously. "And he asked very particular questions about how you're settling in, whether you're happy here." "What did you tell him?" Willow asked, attempting to keep her voice neutral. "The truth. That you've taken to teaching like a duck to water and the whole town adores you." Sarah set down her cup. "I also mentioned you'll be at the harvest dance next Saturday." Willow nearly choked on her tea. "Sarah, I never said I was going to that." Well, you are now, Sarah replied unrepentantly. And I have a strong suspicion Fletcher Elliott might make an appearance too, though he hasn't attended a town social in all the time he's lived here. Despite her protests, Willow found herself looking forward to the harvest dance with embarrassing eagerness. She told herself it was simply because it would be her first social event in Copper Springs, but she couldn't deny that the possibility of seeing Fletcher again added a special anticipation to her preparations. The Saturday of the dance arrived clear and cool. Autumn had begun to touch the landscape, bringing with it cooler nights and golden afternoons. Willow spent the morning teaching some of the older girls to make paper decorations for the town hall, then returned to the boarding house to prepare for the evening. Mrs. Hanson had loaned her a lovely lavender dress with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. As Willow arranged her hair, pinning the golden waves into a simple but elegant style, she couldn't help wondering if Fletcher would indeed attend the dance, and what he might think of her appearance if he did. The town hall had been transformed for the occasion. Paper lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the wooden floor that had been cleared for dancing. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and at the far end of the room, 3 local men with fiddles and a guitar provided lively music. Willow was immediately surrounded by her pupils and their parents, all eager to introduce her to relatives who had come from outlying farms for the celebration. She smiled and chatted, all the while scanning the growing crowd for a particular tall figure. The evening wore on with no sign of Fletcher. Willow danced with several of the town's eligible men, the young bank clerk, a shopkeeper's son, even the widowed doctor, but found her enthusiasm waning as the hours passed. Perhaps Sarah had been wrong. Perhaps Fletcher had no interest in town gatherings, regardless of who might be attending. She had just stepped outside for a breath of air when a deep voice spoke from the shadows. "Evening, Miss Larson." Willow whirled to see Fletcher standing a few feet away, leaning against a hitching post. He wore a clean dark shirt and vest, his usual denim trousers replaced by woolen ones. His hat was in his hands, leaving his dark hair exposed to the moonlight. "Mr. Elliott," she said, her voice betraying more pleasure than she'd intended. "I didn't realize you were here. Just arrived." He gestured toward the brightly lit hall, not much for crowds. "Yet you came," Willow observed. Fletcher's eyes held hers. "Seems I did." The simple acknowledgement sent a warm flutter through her chest. She moved closer to him, away from the doorway. "I've been meaning to visit your ranch," she said, "to properly thank you for what you did for me." "Told you before, there's no debt between us." Despite his words, Fletcher seemed pleased by her interest. "It's nothing fancy, just a small spread, but it's mine. I'd still like to see it someday." He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to determine her sincerity. "Sunday after church," he said finally. "If you'd like, I could bring the wagon and take you out there, show you around." Willow smiled, delighted by the invitation. "I'd like that very much." A companionable silence fell between them. From inside, the music shifted to a slower, more melodious tune. Fletcher straightened, setting his hat on a nearby post. "Would you care to dance, Miss Larson?" He extended his hand toward her. "Here." Willow glanced around the empty street. "Less crowded," he said with the hint of a smile. Willow placed her hand in his, feeling a jolt of awareness at the contact. "I would be honored, Mr. Elliott." Fletcher drew her closer, placing his other hand respectfully at her waist. They began to move in time with the music drifting through the open windows, their steps finding a natural rhythm together. Willow was acutely conscious of his nearness, of the subtle scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "You're quite good at this," she remarked, surprised by his sure-footed grace. "Had a mother who insisted her sons learn to dance properly," Fletcher replied. "Said no child of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a wounded buffalo." Willow laughed. "She sounds like a formidable woman." "She was." His expression softened with memory. "Died when I was 17, influenza." "I'm sorry." Willow hesitated, then asked, "And your father passed 2 years later?" Heart gave out. Fletcher's steps never faltered as he spoke. Left the farm to my older brother James. He still runs it back in Missouri. Willow absorbed this information, piecing together the fragments of his past. So you came west on your own, after the war. The music swelled around them as they turned. Needed open spaces after all that, Willow understood. She had her own reasons for leaving the East behind, though hers had more to do with heartbreak than warfare. And now you have your ranch. Now I have my ranch, he agreed. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. What about you, Miss Larson? What brought you all the way from Boston to Arizona Territory? Adventure, I suppose, she said, though that was only part of the truth. And a desire to go where I was needed. There are hundreds of teachers in Boston, but out here, she shrugged slightly. Out here, I can make a difference. Fletcher nodded, seeming to understand the unspoken parts of her answer. You're making one already. Town's different since you arrived. The music began to fade, but neither of them moved to break apart immediately. Willow looked up into Fletcher's eyes, suddenly breathless at the intensity she found there. Fletcher, she said softly, using his given name for the first time. I, Miss Larson, a child's voice broke the moment. One of Willow's younger pupils, Emma Miller, came running out of the hall. Miss Larson, Pa says to tell you they're cutting the harvest cake now and you should come in for it. Fletcher released Willow and stepped back, reaching for his hat. Better not keep them waiting, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Will you come in? Willow asked, reluctant to end their time together. He shook his head. Think I'll head back, got an early start tomorrow. He settled his hat on his head. Still want to see the ranch Sunday? Very much, Willow confirmed. Fletcher nodded once. I'll bring the wagon after church then. Emma tugged at Willow's hand. Come on, Miss Larson, the cake has maple frosting. Go on, Fletcher said with a small smile. Can't compete with maple frosting. Willow allowed herself to be pulled back toward the hall, glancing over her shoulder to see Fletcher watching her go, his expression unreadable in the shadow of his hat brim. Sunday dawned bright and clear. Willow wore her best dress to church, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and listened with half an ear to Reverend Thompson's sermon on charity and good works. Her attention kept straying to the tall figure seated at the back of the church, his usually wind-blown hair neatly combed for the occasion. After the service, Fletcher waited by his wagon while Willow greeted her pupils and their families. Several parents gave her knowing looks when they saw who was waiting for her, but Willow pretended not to notice. Ready? Fletcher asked as she approached. Yes. She allowed him to help her up onto the wagon seat, settling her skirts around her. The ride to the rocking E took nearly an hour, during which Fletcher pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area. Willow found herself relaxing in his company, charmed by his quiet humor and the depth of knowledge he had about the land. There it is, he said eventually, gesturing ahead where a cluster of buildings came into view. Home. The ranch was modest but well maintained. A sturdy log house stood at the center of the property, with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings nearby. Cattle grazed in the distance, black dots against the golden autumn grass. It's lovely, Willow said sincerely. Peaceful. Fletcher's expression warmed at her approval. Not what you're used to, I expect. Better, she assured him. I grew up in a crowded Boston neighborhood. Never had this kind of space. He brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Come inside. Mrs. Gunderson will have dinner waiting. Mrs. Gunderson, Willow asked, suddenly nervous. My housekeeper, Fletcher explained. Widow from town who comes out 3 days a week, cooks enough food to last the rest of the time. He smiled at Willow's visible relief. Did you think I lived entirely alone out here? I didn't know, she admitted. Inside, the house was simple but comfortable, with solid wooden furniture and a few touches that spoke of care curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt draped over a chair, books stacked on a side table. Mrs. Gunderson, a stout woman with iron gray hair, greeted them warmly. "So this is the teacher everyone's talking about," she said, looking Willow over with approval. About time Fletcher brought a proper young lady out to the ranch. "Mrs. Gunderson," Fletcher said warningly. The housekeeper merely chuckled. "Dinner's ready whenever you are." Roast beef, potatoes, and apple pie for dessert. The meal was delicious, and the conversation flowed easily. Mrs. Gunderson joined them, regaling Willow with stories of the ranch's early days and Fletcher's first disastrous attempts at cattle breeding. Fletcher endured the teasing with good grace, his eyes frequently seeking Willow's across the table. After they'd eaten, Mrs. Gunderson shooed them out. "Go show her the ranch properly," she instructed Fletcher. "I've got dishes to see to." Outside, Fletcher led Willow around the property, showing her the barn with its sweet-smelling hay loft, the spring-fed pond where he'd planted willows along the banks, the corral where several fine horses watched them curiously. "That's Thunder," Fletcher said, pointing to the chestnut stallion that had carried them both from the desert. "Best horse I've ever owned." Willow approached the fence, and Thunder stretched his neck toward her, snuffling at her outstretched hand. "He's beautiful," she said, stroking the horse's velvety nose, "and brave. He carried double through the desert without complaint." "He's taken a shine to you," Fletcher observed, watching them. "Good judge of character, Thunder is." Willow glanced at him. "And what about his owner?" "Is he also a good judge of character?" Fletcher's gaze intensified. "Getting better at it," he said quietly. They continued their tour, eventually climbing a small rise behind the house that offered a view of the entire property, stretched out below them in the afternoon sun. "It's not much compared to some of the big spreads," Fletcher said, "but it's all paid for and the land's good." "It's wonderful," Willow told him sincerely. "You've built something real here, Fletcher, something lasting." He turned to face her. "It's been a solitary life," he admitted. "Never minded that before." "And now?" Willow asked, her heart beating faster. Fletcher stepped closer. "Now I'm not so sure." He reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to move away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You've changed things, Willow." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her. "How have I changed things? Made me wonder what I've been missing," he said simply. "Made me think about more than just cattle and horses and making it through each season." Willow swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the emotion in his voice. "I think about you," she confessed, "more than is probably proper." A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Is that so?" She nodded, emboldened by his response. "I wonder what you're doing when we're not together." "Whether you think of me too." "Every day," Fletcher said, his voice rough. "Since I found you in that desert." The admission hung between them, charged with possibility. Fletcher's hand cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. "May I kiss you, Willow?" In answer, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, but deepened as Fletcher's arms came around her, drawing her closer. Willow felt a sense of rightness of coming home that she had never experienced before. When they finally drew apart, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since the dance," he murmured. "Only since then," Willow teased, breathless from the kiss. He chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Maybe before. Maybe since I carried you out of that desert." His expression grew serious. "But I didn't want you to feel obligated, didn't want your gratitude confused with other feelings." "This isn't gratitude," Willow assured him, her hands resting against his chest. "Though I will always be thankful you found me that day." Fletcher kissed her again, more briefly this time. "We should head back," he said reluctantly. "Don't want to give the gossips too much to talk about." Willow nodded, though she was reluctant for the day to end. They walked back to the house hand in hand, a comfortable silence between them. Mrs. Gunderson took one look at them and smiled knowingly, but said nothing beyond offering them coffee before their return journey. On the ride back to town, Fletcher asked Willow about her plans for the school, listening with genuine interest to her ideas for expanding the curriculum and perhaps starting an evening class for adults who wished to improve their reading. "Town's lucky to have you," he said. The children especially. I'm the lucky one, Willow replied, to have found a place where I'm needed, where I can build something meaningful. She hesitated. Where I've found someone who sees me for who I am. Fletcher's hand covered hers on the wagon seat. I see you, Willow Larson. And I like what I see. The weeks that followed took on a pattern. Willow taught during the week, and Fletcher came to town most Sundays after church to take her on outings. Sometimes they rode to the ranch, other times they picnicked by a stream or explored the hills around Copper Springs. Always, there were moments of quiet conversation, shared laughter, and increasingly passionate kisses when they found themselves alone. News of their courtship, for that was what it unmistakably was, spread quickly through Copper Springs. Most seemed pleased by the development, particularly Mrs. Hanson, who took credit for providing the proper setting for romance to bloom at her boarding house. Never seen Fletcher Elliott so happy, Dr. Parker commented to Willow after church one Sunday. Man's been a hermit since he moved here, but now he's smiling and tipping his hat to ladies on the street. It's a transformation. Willow blushed, but couldn't deny her pleasure at the observation. She had seen the change in Fletcher herself, a new openness, a willingness to engage with the community that hadn't been there before. For her part, Willow found herself flourishing in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her school was thriving, with attendance growing as word spread to outlying farms. She had begun an adult literacy class 2 evenings a week, teaching several of the miners and ranch hands who had never had formal education. And her heart was fuller than it had ever been. As winter approached, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional light frosts, Fletcher began to spend more time in town. The first heavy snow of the season found him at the boarding house, sharing dinner with Willow and Mrs. Hanson as the wind howled outside. Too dangerous to head back to the ranch tonight, Mrs. Hanson declared, though Willow suspected the storm wasn't nearly as severe as the landlady made it out to be. You'll have to take our spare room, Mr. Elliott. Fletcher accepted the invitation with good grace, his eyes meeting Willow's across the table with warm amusement. After dinner, Mrs. Hanson made a show of retiring early with a touch of headache, leaving Willow and Fletcher alone in the parlor with a crackling fire. Subtle, isn't she? Fletcher remarked, settling beside Willow on the small sofa. Willow laughed. About as subtle as a stampeding bull. She's been dropping hints about wedding bells since our second outing together. Fletcher's expression grew thoughtful at her words. And how do you feel about that particular topic? He asked carefully. Willow's heart skipped a beat. Wedding bells, he nodded, taking her hand in his. Been thinking about it myself, he admitted. Quite a lot, actually. Have you? Willow's voice was barely above a whisper. Fletcher shifted to face her more directly. Willow, I never expected to find you, certainly never expected to love you. His fingers tightened around hers. But I do love you, that is. Tears pricked at Willow's eyes. I love you too, she said, the words coming easily, naturally. So much. Relief and joy washed over Fletcher's face. Then maybe Mrs. Hanson isn't being so presumptuous after all. He took a deep breath. I'm not a wealthy man, Willow. The ranch does well enough, but it's a hard life sometimes. Still, he looked into her eyes. Would you consider becoming my wife, sharing that life with me? Willow didn't hesitate. Yes, she said firmly. Yes, I would consider it. In fact, I accept. Fletcher's smile was radiant as he gathered her into his arms. The kiss they shared was filled with promise, with dreams of the future they would build together. Should we wait until spring? Willow asked when they finally drew apart. For the wedding, Fletcher shook his head. Christmas, he suggested. If that's not too soon, don't want to rush you, but Christmas would be perfect, Willow agreed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Just over a month away. Gives me time to add on to the house, Fletcher said, already making plans. Another bedroom maybe, and bookshelves. Know you miss your books. Willow's eyes filled with tears again at his thoughtfulness. I don't need things, Fletcher, just you. You'll have me, he promised. Every day for the rest of our lives. News of their engagement spread through Copper Springs like wildfire. The town embraced the romance of their story, the schoolteacher left to die in the desert, rescued by the reclusive rancher who found love where he least expected it. The weeks leading up to Christmas were a whirlwind of activity. Fletcher worked tirelessly on the ranch house, adding the promised bedroom and bookshelves, as well as a small study where Willow could prepare her lessons. The women of the town rallied around Willow, helping her prepare for the wedding and her new life as a rancher's wife. "You'll need sturdier clothes," Sarah Matthews advised as she helped Willow select fabric for new dresses. "And boots. Can't manage a ranch in those city shoes." Willow welcomed the advice, eager to learn everything she could about the life she was choosing. In the evenings, when Fletcher came to town, they would sit before the fire in Mrs. Hanson's parlor, talking of their plans for the future. "The school board wants me to continue teaching," Willow told him one night, "even after we're married, if you don't mind." "Why would I mind?" Fletcher asked, genuinely puzzled. "You love teaching and the children need you." He brushed a kiss against her temple. "We'll make it work." Ranch isn't far from town. As their wedding day approached, Willow received unexpected news. Sheriff Donovan called her to his office one afternoon to inform her that the Johnson brothers had been captured in Tucson. "They were trying to sell some of your books," he explained. Bookseller recognized the name inside the cover, W. Larson, and remembered the telegrams I sent. "Authorities picked them up that same day, and my belongings?" Willow asked, hardly daring to hope. "Most were recovered," Donovan said with satisfaction. "Being shipped back here now. Should arrive before your wedding day." Willow was overjoyed to share the news with Fletcher. "My mother's locket was in that trunk," she told him, her eyes shining, "and my father's Bible, and all my books, first editions of Emerson and Thoreau that my father collected." Fletcher's happiness matched her own. "Just in time for those new bookshelves," he said, pulling her close, "and justice being served too." On Christmas Eve, Willow Larson became Willow Elliott in a simple ceremony at the Copper Springs Church. She wore a cream-colored dress that Sarah and the other ladies had helped her make, with a sprig of winter berries in her hair. Fletcher, standing tall and proud beside Reverend Thompson, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle. Their vows were straightforward but heartfelt, promises to love and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When Fletcher slipped his mother's gold band onto Willow's finger, his hand was steady but his eyes were damp. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson declared to the packed church. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The celebration afterward filled the town hall with music and dancing lasting well into the night. As the newly married couple prepared to leave for the ranch, their home now, the townspeople lined the street to wish them well. "Take good care of our teacher," Mayor Hollister called to Fletcher. "I plan to," Fletcher replied, his arm securely around Willow's waist, "for the rest of my life." The ranch house was warm and welcoming when they arrived, a fire blazing in the hearth and candles lighting their way. Fletcher carried Willow across the threshold, setting her gently on her feet in what was now their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Elliott," he said softly. Willow looked around at the simple but comfortable space, at the bookshelves Fletcher had built with his own hands, at the framed photographs he had arranged of both their families. This was where she belonged, not lost in a desert, but found in the heart of a good man. "Home," she agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss her husband. At last. As spring returned to the Arizona territory, bringing wildflowers and new calves to the rocking E, Willow continued to divide her time between teaching in town and helping on the ranch. She learned to ride properly, to mend fences, even to help with branding when needed. The townsfolk grew accustomed to seeing her ride to and from school on the gentle mare Fletcher had trained especially for her. Their evenings were spent in comfortable companionship, reading aloud to each other from Willow's recovered books, planning improvements to the ranch. Sometimes simply sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "Still glad you said yes." Fletcher asked one such evening, his arm around his wife as they watched the stars emerge. Willow leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "Asking me that is like asking if I'm glad you found me that day in the desert," she replied. "Some questions have only one possible answer." Fletcher's laugh was low and warm. "And what's that?" Willow turned in his arms to face him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "That finding you being found by you was the beginning of everything good in my life." She pressed a kiss to his lips. "And I have never been more grateful for anything." As they held each other close in the gathering darkness, Willow thought of how far she had come from that desperate day in the desert. She had been lost then, in more ways than one. But Fletcher Elliott had found her, had looked at her half-dead form and declared, "Not today." Not today would she die, not today would she give up. And because of those words, because of his determination and compassion, she had found not just survival, but love. A love as vast and enduring as the western sky above them, as true and steady as the man who held her in his arms. In the years that followed, the story of how Willow and Fletcher Elliott found each other became something of a legend in Copper Springs. Their family grew with the addition of 2 sons and a daughter, all of whom inherited their father's strength and their mother's love of learning. The Rocking E prospered under their joint stewardship, becoming one of the most respected ranches in the territory. Willow continued to teach for many years, eventually opening a larger school that served children from all the surrounding areas. Fletcher, once the reluctant hermit, became a respected community leader, serving on the town council and helping to guide Copper Springs through the transition from territory to statehood. But no matter how busy their lives became, they never forgot how their story began with a half-dead woman abandoned in the desert and a cowboy who refused to let her die. Each year, on the anniversary of that fateful day, they would ride together to the spot where Fletcher had found Willow and renew their private vows of devotion. "Not today" became their personal motto, a reminder that life could change in an instant, that love could be found in the most desperate circumstances, and that sometimes a simple refusal to give up could lead to the greatest happiness of all.